Today we are finally talking about the Loki rework again. I've released one video about this before. Since then, HiRez has released more statements written and in video format about how Loki will be handled, how they are going forward with the changes, address some of the concerns and so on, and that's what we're going to look at today. I summarized both the video as well as the written text into this one thing, so you have all in one place here, and I'm gonna add my opinion where appropriate. Let's jump into it. The first ability, Vanish, only received relatively minor changes. It'll now take longer until you fully go into stealth, your character will kind of fade out a little bit, and you will flicker when you take damage. However, HiRez wants to state here that it doesn't mean that Loki is super visible all the time when using his wand. Rather, that the timing for these interactions should be the quickest possible. So he will very quickly go into stealth and he will only flicker very, very briefly. The flicker should generally have a similar feeling to damage numbers. So at the moment, if you damage Loki in stealth, then you'll see a damage number pop up and you can kind of see the direction that Loki is walking in from that damage number as well. And that's kind of the way that the flicker should feel as well, only that those who are not familiar with the numbers maybe, or want a little bit more visibility, will be able to tell which direction he's going in. It's also still in discussion how different types of damage will affect this. So for example, if he will flicker during dots in similar interactions, and that can be changed on a case-by-case basis, so that is not set in stone at all. So overall, don't expect this ability to suddenly be useless or anything, but rather just with a little bit more counterplay, a little bit more indication of where Loki is moving towards if you're able to find out where he's going in the first place. HiRez specifically stated that the new visual effects for Vanish will nearly have zero impact at high levels of play, where people know how to track him already. The second ability, the decoy, is now Agonizing Venom. A quick recap in case you forgot how that's going to work now. Loki summons a vision of his past to torment and poison enemies. A spectral version of Loki bound by chains with poison dripping onto his face is summoned to a location. Enemies nearby take damage every second, enemies hit 4 times by this become blinded. Blinded enemies now take damage from behind you when hit by Loki from any direction. Lasts roughly 3 seconds and ticks a total of 6 times. And in the initial pitch, the deployable did not taunt, couldn't be damaged or targeted, and did not draw tower aggro. In the new pitch, HiRez has already stated that while Taunt and Bodyblock are not included at the moment, at least Bodyblocks is up for consideration and will likely be included just to have that extra counterplay mechanic for players who are really used to this mechanic and really want to abuse this mechanic. Another concern with this ability is that enemies can just walk out, and the goal for HiRez is here to force enemies to make a decision. Stay in and take some damage and potentially get blinded, or leave right away to avoid the damage. Different from the decoy where you had some time to stay in before you had to leave. Also, they want this ability to be an effective self-peel while you're boxing, which especially against AA characters will play a role because then they run the risk of taking more damage and getting blinded as well, which then gives you even more damage. They have a lot of balance variables that they can still adjust here: the deploy time, the tick rate, the duration, and the stacks needed for the blind. They're also considering to give the ability a persistent slow to make it harder to get out of the blind effect. The goal is for the ability to have a high chance to blind people, and for it to be able to zone very well in the jungle, especially by blocking off path because you don't really want to run through it. I think the suggestions here definitely make this a lot more interesting than the initial pitch. There are many factors that would make a difference in how it exactly will perform and feel, but it's clear that this is one of the more experimental parts so far, where HiRez just wants to see what exactly can be done with the ability without making it too weak or too strong. But I could see this, especially if the Bodyblock comes back, potentially being liked by most Loki players, even though it will mean that the taunt will more likely not come back, and the clear will therefore be hindered to some degree. But I honestly think that's a good thing because he gets better clear in other ways, and it pushes him more from solo into the jungle, which I think is where he should really go as an assassin. I know that some people will not be happy with this and want to keep him as a solo laner, but really, design-wise, I think with high damage and everything, he is much more made for the jungle role and kind of throws off the team by being in solo more than he would otherwise. But again, he also gets some other AoE abilities, namely the 3. The previous aimed strike will now be Flurry of Daggers, a cone attack. One of Loki players' main concerns with this ability is that it may be losing some of its AA cancel burst, because you can use a basic attack, then the ability, and then another basic attack, and it's very, very quick damage. The immediate burst that he was able to deal with this was previously, if you cancel it perfectly, apparently in roughly 0.8 seconds, and HiRez wasn't really happy with that. It was frustrating to deal with, so one of their goals was to reduce that frustration. The other goal was to improve his jungle clear. Now, they're already talking about potentially upping the damage value in return, and also potentially front-loading some of the damage so that at the start of the channel, the first strikes from the Flurry will deal more damage, and then towards the end it gets less, so you get punished less for it. So the current draft for this ability is, compared to the old 0.8 seconds for the damage output, they would want it to be roughly 1.75 seconds to 2 seconds from your basic attack to the ability channel being finished. In return, this ability would be AoE, and obviously 2 seconds is not super long either, but it is significantly longer. But again, this is not meant as a pure nerf. They are considering possibly significantly higher scaling, and it's also not meant to be like Anubis 1. You will still be able to move while channeling this. The goal here is to still be able to fire the ability quickly, but have better visual feedback than the current combo has, which is really just basic attacks cancelled into each other. You can still use your basic attack before cancelling it again, so you'll still have at least some cancellation in there. There are some experimental things that HiRez is considering for this ability. One is that they're considering to trigger either basic attack item effects or ability item effects, or both on this item, which would be very, very interesting and very, very strong if they did that. Just imagine being hit by HiRez and Heartseeker and Arendite at the same time or something, or being hit by Toxic Blade and Brawlers at the same time. I feel like they might not actually go through with that because it could be too strong in some situations. Another thing they mentioned is the potential for it to trigger Vanish Stim, though I'm not quite sure how that one would work. I really don't know if they meant out of Vanish or just proccing it again, which would be incredibly strong. Then they could potentially make Loki immune to side and backstab movement penalties, so you can chase enemies very easily in this and put damage on them. And they're also considering to potentially increase the movement speed during the channel. So there are a lot of potential increases that may come with the decrease here, basically. I think especially in the beginning, until the numbers are fine-tuned here, this will still feel more like a nerf. But especially with the item activation, it may definitely have its perks as well, and again, it helps with jungle clear, but also may help his relatively limited teamfight potential. And then we have the ultimate. Now the ultimate basically gets multiple stages. The first stage is relatively similar to the old ultimate in terms of animation, but it will damage the enemy and it will cripple them. And then shortly afterwards, Loki attacks again with a cone attack in front of him, short range, and then he will deal more damage and he will stun the enemy. And in between these two stages, Loki can freely move. There's few concerns with this ability that HiRez addressed. It could take too long to fire the ability, or it could be too easy to avoid the second part of the ability. And if this ability gets too nerfed, it might only be used as an escape. That is already how some Loki players play. It's not universal, but some Loki players prefer using it as escape in its current state already. And last but not least, you may no longer be able to quickly interrupt or peel for your team. Much like with the third ability, the main reason for the changes here is that the previous version was very frustrating to play against. The reaction time was 0.3 seconds, even less if you factor in that you actually had to realize that Loki was there first. And you basically, in most situations, could only counter it by using beats plus Aegis, or trying to anticipate the Loki ult and then throwing out your Aegis preemptively, but either was really often risky or felt like a waste if it didn't go right. The goals here were to give Loki some more time to react and give Loki some more flexibility. Now what HiRez wanted to make clear is that the ability will not be super slow. It will be 1 second maximum between the two stages of the ultimate. It's not like they have a lot of time to run away. Also, they are considering to add bonus CC on the first hit in whatever shape, Two things they've put up for consideration here are potentially adding a slow or a silence to the cripple. Also, they are considering to increase the overall damage of the ability and potentially the stun duration if you confirm it as well. And of course, they can also tweak the AoE part of the ability itself. I think if the ability actually ends up dealing more damage or having longer CC, this can feel like a fair trade-off, especially because while you don't stun enemies for the entire time, you may overall still get more CC due to the fact that you also get the cripple and whatever other CC they add to the first part in addition to the stun afterwards. So it really depends on the situation if it's more or less useful, especially also if there are multiple enemies around and maybe you can strategically play in a way where you can hit 2 people with a stun. It's not too hard to do that. We'll have to see the specifics here, but again, I think this doesn't necessarily sound like it's inherently bad, just that it will feel different overall. And again, it will slow down Loki a bit, which I think players are gonna struggle with initially at least. HiRez stated that we should really not worry too much and Loki is likely going to be stronger and more popular than ever. The goal is getting him away from being a split pushing character and making his stealth and ambush potential not feel uncounterable, but not to change him beyond recognition. The perfect Loki combo, so to speak, in terms of damage output would not drastically change. It would go from 1.55 seconds to 2 to 2.5-ish seconds, depending on the exact numbers that they end up with. In return, he will have more unique effects like AoE and potentially also more damage. In conclusion, HiRez stated the rework will go ahead as planned and will likely arrive around mid-season or slightly later. I do think that overall the rework is good in many ways, and it will put Loki in a healthier place. There are concerns that I have with it, especially surrounding this 3, because I feel like while the damage may be shifted differently, there could be the risk of being easily interrupted while using it, and that would really hurt him compared to the current version. But overall, I'm still very excited and I hope that it turns out in a way where I enjoy playing Loki more. Let me know how you feel in the comments down below, and other than that, if you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell. We'll talk about SMITE potentially growing at the moment soon. And other than that, I hope to see you all for the next one very soon. DukeSloth, out.